So I'm here to talk a little bit about public art, and I'm going to show you, I'm also going to show you a few examples of some of my favorite public art. It all happens to be done by me, but just coincidentally. But first of all, so what is public art? I've done a lot of research on this, meaning I looked it up on Wikipedia before this talk. And in general, public art is, all it really says is that it's art that's been planned and is staged for a public space. And it said, let's see, comma, accessible to all, end quote. So it's that part of accessible at all that I want to talk about. I think they mean a location, which is certainly true, but I also started to think that accessibility was also a kind of a visual language. It really does talk about how to speak to the public, and I'll explain that a little bit as I go on. So keep thinking about this idea of public art, public art. If there's public art, there must conversely be private art. Nobody really, I don't know that term, private art. Sounds dirty, doesn't it, private art? But I've been thinking about this, and I think I know what private art is. So let me just, this is supposed to be about our origins tonight. I don't think I was an exceptional child as a lot of our speakers. My origin story is I was raised in suburbs of Cincinnati, and I grew up drawing. I think a lot of kids draw, I just never stopped. So I just drew and watched television, basically, you know. I'm gonna do this the rest of the talk. This is a performance now. So anyway, that's what I did growing up. And then eventually it seemed like I was very happy drawing, watching television, until finally it seemed like it was time to either go to Hollywood or college. And I decided to do the more practical thing, and I went to college to get a degree in art. Very practical decision. So I went to, as was said, I got my bachelor's degree, and then I came to Chicago and got my master's degree. And in college and in graduate school, I really fell in love with art. And I mean the whole history of it, the theories behind it, modern art, and contemporary art. And there I learned all the isms, meaning abstract expressionism, modernism, neo-expressionism, I could go on and on and on. Postmodernism, of course. And I love that, all of that info, and I continue to love that information, and I continue to learn about it. But I think that's what private art is. I think it is what I learned in school and what I've been teaching for the last 28 years. Meaning, hey, I went to school for 6 years, I've been teaching this. No problem with that sort of specialized language, except all of a sudden when I started to have the opportunity to make public art, I don't know, I began to question that a little bit, that maybe there was something different between what I call private art, what I learned in school, and public art, what I was then, you know, asked to do. So, and private art can be subversive, it can be anti-aesthetical, it can be critical, it can be dirty, right? So even just to give you an example of something, this is a photograph I made in 1994, it's life-size, and it's called I Peed in My Pants, and I did, okay? And so this is a good example of what I would call maybe private art, meaning it is art that is transgressive. I don't want to get into too much about what I was thinking about. It's a very deep psychological piece about kind of desire and sort of wanting approval, but being in control of that at the same time. It's my transgressive gesture. So this is, I was thinking about a lot of things, but I would not call this public art. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to show that as a kind of an example of other stuff that I've done. So before I really had this opportunity to make public art, you know, I've been making art for 20 years. I've been showing in galleries and museums. I know you're saying, wait a minute, that's public too. You go to a gallery or you go to a museum, you're going to be confronted by art. You're going there to be confounded. It's not exactly the same. Public art is something you sort of bump into on your way to work, right? It's not a destination, it's actually something you encounter. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I got this opportunity a little over a dozen years ago to make a piece for Pittsburgh, and I started thinking, public art, that's a little different. You know, it was intimidating, making something that really speaks to an audience. And these are not temporary pieces, these are permanent pieces. So I started to research. Chicago's got a lot of great public art. Started looking at a lot of the art in Chicago and other places, and I'm going to say there are two main categories, and this is a gross generalization, but it's fun for discussion. One category of public art, let's call it the classical heroic sculpture, and you know what these are. They're fairly realistic, often bronze, sometimes stone, realistic portrait statue of a dead white man. And there are lots of these around. Founding fathers are very popular. Illinois, there are lots of Abraham Lincoln sculptures. We all know that. Actually, true fact, there are as many Lincoln sculptures in Illinois as Starbucks coffee. That's a true fact. No, it's not. So anyway, but that's the genre, right? And you know the, they were so quiet, I thought you believed me. So you know that kind of sculpture. Of course, the most famous is the Lincoln Memorial in that genre. Women in this category don't do quite as well. They're not really real people per se. They're more like virtues, like Blind Justice, or the most famous Statue of Liberty. Not a real person, but still an icon. And you know, with all the problems of those pieces, meaning there's racism and sexism that's sort of implicit in part of that history, but I did admire those works' ability to speak to a wide audience. You don't have to know anything to experience them. And heck, even the Statue of Liberty tells you what it's about right on the bottom. So there's no mystery. The second category I would call the modernist abstraction, right? And you know what I'm talking about. I mean, it's so radical, it's fabulous. Everything I've been talking about is sort of all of history. And then all of a sudden, 20th century, we have modernism and abstraction. And these are the big steel, let's call them the heavy metal sculptures, steel, welded steel, you know. I'm going to do impressions of them now. They're like I-beams, you know, a lot of I-beams, bright colors, orange is popular. I'm not showing you these sculptures because you know what I'm talking about, and this is my TED Talk. So, and as fabulous as a lot of that art is, and of course I'm bringing it all together, it's like even if it was radical at one time, think of all the sculptures you've walked past in shopping malls and libraries, and that are these generic metal, welded, steel, that there are just too many of them. They lost their radicality to me. So those are the two categories, blah, blah, blah. So finally, I had my opportunity to make this piece in Pittsburgh, and I kind of went with the classical model, but I wasn't going to deal with the figure. This is, it's a little hard to see in the light, but this is a bronze magnolia tree. This is a magnolia tree that I sculpted, hand sculpted, then had it cast in bronze, cast twice, painted realistically, and I put it in a little grove of 5 real magnolia trees. So this is a real tree, and this is, I got it wrong. This is the real tree, and this is the bronze, right? So it's this little fairy tale magic moment. The bronze matches the real trees for just a couple of weeks out of the year. And then the rest of the time, it's more of a, it's this sort of surprise. This is it in winter. So those are all bronze. That's just something I got off the internet. It's a funny, which I'm going to talk about that in a second. It's a funny thing about this piece is that I didn't really expect is people did kind of walk past it. They didn't necessarily register it right away because I think people don't, once they think something, they stop looking. So they saw these trees, thought they were real, and kept going. So it was almost like an insider thing after a while. Or maybe you would recognize later that night, you're like, wait a minute, it's winter. Why is that tree blooming? So anyway, that was that piece. And my next piece, I didn't want people to just walk by it. So this is a piece in Dallas, Texas. It's called I. It's 30 feet in diameter. And here I'm going back to nature again, but instead of this little fairy tale moment, it's a little more of a nightmare maybe. Still thinking about nature, but instead of nature as this sort of symbol, it's more about the psychological. The eye is this, it's one of the most used symbols in the world. There's the Pharaoh's eye, the eye on the Masonic dollar. There's the, it's also just cool. It's a big bloody eyeball. It's like, I think if you look at my high school, yearbook or my school books, they probably had, flaming eyeballs in the margins, in ballpoint pen. There's people doing yoga in front of the eye. I also got this off the internet. I wanted to say just about that, these images, because even though like I'm an old-timey, I feel so old here tonight with all this great technology, so I make these, plop sculptures, but I know we live in this digital world, in this world of communication, so one way my works have a second life is they are these kind of magnets for selfies, And so if you look at any of these pieces on Instagram, this literally gets something every week, and it's been up for a few years. This is a piece, it's called Paul. This is Governor State Sculpture Park, just south of here. I made this piece we had already been in Iraq for a little over a year, and it was appearing to be, there was a feeling that we were entering a quagmire. This was not a short shock and awe. This was something that was going to last, and of course it has. And everybody knows Paul Bunyan. I use things that are already familiar icons. So there are lots of Paul Bunyan sculptures. Paul Bunyan, he's usually this young guy, broad shoulders, axe on his shoulder. He might have Babe, his blue ox, his buddy, with him. I just thought, what would happen? And I always thought of that character as a kind of like a figure of manifest destiny or a sense of American exceptionalism, a symbol of that. And I thought, what would happen if Paul got a little older? Maybe he had a little regret in life. Maybe where's Babe the blue ox? He's in a funk. I don't know. So I thought about, just giving him, basically making Paul grow up. And he's also 30 feet tall. You see a little figure there to give it scale. I was thinking about, it sounds pretentious, but I'm thinking about Michelangelo and King Lear and Walt Disney. This is called Rainbow. It's for Sony. I was invited to do something at Sony Entertainment in Culver City. Sony Entertainment is where the old MGM Grand studios were, so it's this historic movie set or studio lot. It's where Citizen Kane was filmed. It's where Gone with the Wind was filmed. And it's where The Wizard of Oz was filmed, a la this thing is, it's almost 100 feet tall by 200 feet wide, and it really does become kind of an icon for Culver City. This piece is a little different. It operates a little differently. I think it's not as public. What this is, let me see how I can say this. Instead of making a public work of art, this is a work that makes art public. And what I mean by that is, this is called the Artist's Monument, and it's 80 feet by 8 feet by 8 feet tall. And around all four sides, it's acrylic panels, and it's etched with the names of almost 400,000 modern and contemporary artists. So it's hard to explain, and it's in alphabetical order. It's hard to explain how thorough it is, how big that is, but we're in this era of big data. So I was able to collect this data in a way that's never been able before. And so the most famous, Picasso, Warhol, George O'Keeffe, they're right next to, Joe Blow, who's never done it, who's had one show 15 years ago at a university gallery. They're in there at the same point. And it's been a great piece because people come and they come and they find their relatives or they find themselves on it. So obviously I'm riffing on something like the Vietnam Memorial and other memorials. Those pieces usually, they're memorializing a tragedy in a way, right? Maybe a heroic event, but still a tragedy. I thought it'd be interesting to memorialize or to make a monument to creativity, to something, I don't want to say necessarily more positive, but something different. And also it's I guess, well, that's all I want to say, just to bring art to the public. This is the last piece I'll show you. I finally had the guts to make something figurative, and this is a piece that's in progress. I go next week to sort of pitch it to it's a women's and children's hospital in Santa Clara, and this is going to be a mural, not a mural, it's actually going to be laser cut and put up on the top of the building, hopefully. And, you know, the point of this talk or these public pieces is that I'm looking for, you know, even though I've had this specialized language of art, in a funny way, my years of watching television were just as informative when I wanted to speak to a big audience. So this is a piece that's obviously, you know, riffing on these heroic battle scenes, but here I'm making the heroes doctors and nurses and orderlies, and they're in this fight with diseases. And these are actually real, like this here is streptococcus. Anyway, I tried to be very sort of diverse, and it's in this superhero language. It's important that the bodies were normal bodies. They were not pumped up, you know, superhero bodies. It's funny because I worked with an illustrator to make this, and I kept saying, like, make them a little heavier. Could this guy be bald? Or could they, you know? So anyway, it was important that they were like real people and that they were in this battle. So I don't know, I like its message. It's sort of, it's also, this is a hospital and it's a place where, you know, people come and they keep coming back and forth. So unlike the big iconic, like the big eyeball or the big rainbow, I wanted something that would sustain, you know, looking at it for longer and longer. So that's part of what my idea was. Okay, thank you very much.